In the 1346-1347, at the Battle of Crécy, hundreds of armored knights were cut down in the mud, unable to move, unable to breathe properly, helpless beneath the very armor meant to protect them. Being a knight was not a fairy tale. It was cold stone floors in winter. It was 40 pounds of metal pressing against your ribs. It was infections from wounds that never fully healed. It was politics, debts, and constant fear of disgrace. From childhood, noble boys were shaped into weapons, trained to fight before they understood what war truly meant. Honor was demanded. Obedience was expected. Survival was never guaranteed. Behind the polished armor and legendary stories, daily life was harsh, exhausting, and often painfully ordinary. So what was it really like? What did a knight eat? Where did he sleep? How did he train? And why was this so-called dream life mostly miserable? Let's step beyond the myths and enter the real world of the medieval knight. The image of a knight often appears polished and bright. Steel gleams beneath the sun. A banner lifts in a steady wind. A horse stands tall and obedient, its mane combed and its harness adorned with careful stitching. From a distance, such a figure seems secure in purpose and honored by all who pass along the road. Yet the truth was far less comfortable. Before a man ever wore armor, before he bore a shield marked with color and sign, he began as a child sent away from home. Many noble families gave their sons to another lord's household while they were still young. The parting was rarely gentle. A boy who had known the warmth of his mother's hall found himself among strangers, sleeping in a corner of a chamber that smelled of rushes and smoke. His days no longer belonged to him. He rose before dawn. He cleaned weapons too heavy for his arms. He carried water from wells that stood cold in winter and muddy in spring. He learned to bow correctly and to kneel without wavering. If he stumbled, correction came swiftly. No one softened the lessons. Courtesy and obedience were expected, not praised. Food was plain and often scarce. Bread hardened quickly in damp air. Porridge cooled in wooden bowls. Meat was reserved for important tables, and even then it was salted or smoked to preserve it through lean months. A growing boy felt hunger as a constant companion. He did not speak of it. As the years passed, his duties grew heavier. He trained with wooden swords that bruised his knuckles. He lifted shields until his shoulders trembled. He ran across uneven fields in boots that soaked through after rain. There were no quiet excuses. Endurance was not a virtue but a requirement. Winter training was especially bitter. Frost stiffened the ground. Breath turned white in the early light. Fingers numbed around spear shafts. Armor left overnight in an unheated chamber felt like touching stone from a riverbed. Metal against skin stole warmth at once. Still, practice continued. There were moments of ceremony. A feast day might bring music from a lute or harp. Torches flickered against stone walls. Older knights wore their spurs and belts with calm pride. The young trainees watched with wide eyes, imagining the day they would stand so confidently. They did not yet understand the weight that came with such ornaments. When a squire at last neared manhood, expectation settled on him like another layer of mail. He was no longer merely learning. He was being judged. Every movement on horseback was observed. Every swing of a blade was measured. A fall from the saddle brought sharp embarrassment. A mistake during practice lingered in memory long after the bruise faded. The horse itself was not a gentle companion. War horses were strong, restless animals bred for power. They required constant care. Hooves had to be cleaned. Harness straps mended. Illness could take them quickly. A knight without a horse was a soldier on foot, and that difference shaped his worth in battle. Armor, so admired in stories, was rarely comfortable. A full harness pressed against shoulders and hips. Leather straps bit into flesh. The helmet narrowed vision and trapped breath. On warm days, heat gathered beneath the steel. Sweat-soaked linen garments worn underneath. Skin chafed raw along the collar and under the arms. The weight did not lessen with familiarity. It demanded strength simply to stand upright. When mounted, the burden shifted but did not disappear. Long hours in the saddle stiffened the back and thighs. A knight rode where he was ordered, whether through mud, across rocky hills, or along narrow forest paths where branches scraped at his visor. War itself offered little glory to those inside it. Before battle, there was waiting. Camps stretched across open fields, marked by canvas tents and the low smoke of cooking fires. The ground soon turned to churned earth beneath many boots. Rain transformed it into a heavy paste that clung to everything. Nights in camp were uneasy. A knight slept lightly, wrapped in a cloak that never seemed thick enough. Sounds carried in the dark. A snapping twig or distant movement stirred anxious thoughts. He knew that surprise attacks were common. Trust was fragile. When battle began, confusion ruled. Lines broke apart. Horses screamed when wounded. The clash of metal against metal rang in the ears. Dust rose from trampled ground and settled inside helmets and throats. It was difficult to see clearly, harder still to think. Striking another man required closeness. It was not a distant act. Faces were visible. Breathing was shared in brief, desperate moments. A knight who hesitated risked his own life. A knight who acted felt the weight of it afterward. Injury was constant. Even a minor wound could turn serious without proper care. Cuts festered. Bones set poorly if broken. Infection traveled quietly through the body. Physicians did what they could with herbs and bandages, yet knowledge was limited. Recovery was uncertain. Between wars, the life of a knight did not grow simple. He was bound by loyalty to a lord whose decisions shaped his fate. Land might be granted in return for service, yet it often required careful management. Peasants needed protection. Fields required oversight. Disputes among villagers demanded judgment. Responsibility pressed from many sides. A failed harvest could bring hunger to those under his care. Bandits on the road threatened trade. Taxes had to be gathered without causing resentment. Each matter seemed small alone, yet together they formed a heavy chain. There was also the matter of reputation. Honor was a fragile thing. A rumor could stain it. A perceived slight might demand response. Tournaments, though celebrated, were dangerous contests. Lances shattered with force. Falls broke ribs and limbs. A single mistake before a watching crowd brought shame. Armor used in tournaments was sometimes heavier than that worn in war. Helmets enclosed the head entirely. Vision narrowed to a thin slit. The impact of a charging opponent struck through the shield and into the chest. Even victory left bruises deep beneath the skin. Travel between lands exposed knights to hardship beyond battle. Roads were rarely smooth. Bridges collapsed without warning. Inns were not always welcoming. Storms rose quickly over open countryside. Cloaks soaked through, and dampness lingered for days. Disease traveled along these same routes. Illness moved from town to town, carried by merchants and soldiers alike. A knight might ride into a village thriving with market noise and leave it weeks later marked by closed shutters and silent streets. Faith shaped much of a knight's inner life. He was taught that his strength served a greater order. Yet doubt often crept in. He had seen suffering caused by war. He had witnessed fields burned and homes emptied. Reconciling duty with consequence required quiet reflection, and answers did not always come. Marriage, when it occurred, was often arranged. Affection might grow, yet it was not guaranteed. A knight could spend long months away from his household. Letters traveled slowly. News of births or deaths might arrive after events had already passed. Children brought both joy and anxiety. A son would likely follow the same path. A daughter might be promised to another house. The cycle continued, and the burdens did not diminish. Age came gradually but firmly. Scars thickened along arms and legs. Joints stiffened after years beneath armor. Riding became more painful. Sleep grew lighter. Younger men appeared stronger and quicker, and the older knight felt time narrowing his path. Stories sung by minstrels rarely included these quieter realities. Songs favored bright shields and noble charges across open fields. They did not dwell on the long evenings spent repairing equipment or the silent mornings after a failed campaign. To outsiders, the knight remained a symbol. To himself, he was a man bound by expectation. His life was shaped by service, discipline, and the constant presence of risk. Comfort was rare and often brief. In the stillness before dawn, when mist lay low across the land and even the birds had not yet begun their calls, a knight sometimes stood alone beside his horse. He checked straps and buckles with careful hands. He listened to the wind moving through distant trees. In those moments, the weight of armor was not yet upon him, but the weight of his role already was. And so the day began again. By mid-morning, the quiet fields often gave way to the enclosed world of a fortified castle. From afar, its towers suggested strength and protection. Up close, it felt confining. Stone walls rose high and unyielding. Narrow windows admitted little light. Air moved slowly through corridors that smelled of smoke, damp fabric, and old straw. Within these walls, a knight's duties shifted but did not lighten. Garrison life demanded constant readiness. Even in times of relative peace, armor had to be maintained. Rust crept over neglected metal with surprising speed. Each link of mail required inspection. Rivets loosened and needed tightening. A dull blade was a danger to its owner. Hours disappeared in careful polishing and sharpening. The castle yard served as both training ground and workplace. Squires carried buckets of sand to spread across muddy patches. Stable hands led horses in circles to keep them exercised. Blacksmiths worked beneath small awnings, their hammers striking iron with steady rhythm. The sound echoed between walls, blending with the low murmur of daily labor. Food within a fortress differed little from what was eaten elsewhere, yet the conditions were harsher during a siege. Supplies were measured carefully. Barrels of grain stood stacked in storerooms. Salted fish hung from hooks. Casks of ale were guarded with attention. A knight understood that each meal consumed reduced the days a castle could endure isolation. When conflict loomed, tension settled over the household. Scouts returned with reports of enemy movements. Messengers rode in with dust covering their cloaks. The gates were reinforced. Additional beams were placed against inner doors. Archers inspected their bows and counted arrows one by one. Standing watch along the battlements exposed a knight to the elements in a different way than open battle. Wind swept across high walls without obstruction. Rain struck from unexpected angles. In winter, ice formed on stone, making footing uncertain. Hours passed slowly while scanning distant horizons. The view from above offered perspective. Fields beyond the walls appeared calm, yet the possibility of attack remained constant. A column of smoke in the distance might signal a farm set aflame. A group of riders on the road could be merchants or enemies. Every shape demanded interpretation. Inside the keep, disputes among nobles added another layer of strain. Alliances were fragile. A careless remark during a feast could foster resentment. Rivalries formed quietly over land, inheritance, or favor. A knight might find himself caught between loyalties, balancing respect with caution. Ceremonial obligations also weighed heavily. Attendance at councils required attention to detail. Garments had to be presentable. Heraldic symbols displayed correctly. Mistakes in protocol brought embarrassment not only to the individual but to the household he represented. Religious observance punctuated the week. Chapels within castle walls were small and dim. Candles burned before simple altars. The scent of wax and incense lingered in the air. A knight knelt beside others, aware of the contrast between the silence of prayer and the violence that often defined his profession. Confession and reflection did not erase memories of conflict. Instead, they sometimes sharpened them. Images of wounded comrades or devastated villages returned during quiet hours. The struggle to reconcile faith with action persisted. Training continued even when no immediate threat pressed against the gates. Archery contests honed aim. Mock skirmishes tested coordination. Wrestling and strength exercises preserved endurance. The body required constant discipline to remain capable beneath armor. Injuries accumulated in subtle ways. A twisted ankle during practice might never fully heal. A shoulder strained by repeated blows could ache for years. There was no long rest set aside for recovery. A knight adapted or risked being replaced by someone younger and more resilient. Beyond the walls, tournaments offered temporary escape from the routine of garrison duty. Traveling to such events meant days on rough roads, yet the gathering itself created a different atmosphere. Tents of various colors filled open fields. Banners fluttered in the breeze. Crowds gathered to watch displays of skill. The spectacle concealed danger. A lance could splinter unpredictably. A fall from horseback during a tilt might break more than pride. Spectators cheered without fully grasping the impact of collisions. Behind the scenes, attendants tended to bruises and concussions with limited remedies. Victory in such contests brought recognition, but it did not erase financial burdens. Armor and horses were costly. Maintaining a knightly household required resources that were not always secure. Debt could accumulate quietly, especially if campaigns disrupted income from lands. Travel for warfare introduced different landscapes. Marching across marshlands soaked boots and bred illness. Crossing mountain passes exposed men and animals to thin air and sudden storms. In southern regions, heat drained strength rapidly. Each environment imposed its own hardships. Supply lines stretched thin during extended campaigns. Foraging became necessary. Tensions rose when local populations resisted providing provisions. A knight tasked with enforcing collection faced the uneasy balance between duty and compassion. Naval expeditions, though less common for some, presented unfamiliar challenges. Boarding a ship meant surrendering the stability of solid ground. Decks pitched beneath shifting waves. Armor felt heavier as the vessel swayed. Sea air corroded metal quickly. Seasickness struck even seasoned warriors. Campaigns sometimes lasted months or years. Homes felt distant. News traveled slowly. A knight might learn of events long after they occurred. The uncertainty fostered a sense of detachment, as though life beyond the battlefield moved according to a separate rhythm. Interactions with common soldiers revealed further complexity. Footmen bore their own burdens. They marched long distances carrying heavy packs. Their armor, if any, offered limited protection. A knight depended on their support, yet the gap in status remained clear. Mutual reliance coexisted with social distance. Ransom formed another aspect of warfare. Captured knights could be held in relative comfort while negotiations unfolded. Yet captivity was never certain in outcome. A family unable to pay might leave a man imprisoned indefinitely. Even temporary confinement eroded dignity. The politics of succession created additional strain. When a lord died without a clear heir, disputes erupted. Knights aligned themselves with factions, sometimes against former allies. Oaths sworn in youth might conflict with emerging realities. Choosing a side risked long-term consequence. Castles themselves were not immune to decay. Stone cracked over time. Wooden beams weakened. Repairs demanded labor and funds. During prolonged peace, maintenance could be neglected, leaving structures vulnerable when conflict returned. Beyond physical hardship lay emotional isolation. The code of conduct expected restraint. Expressions of fear or doubt were discouraged. A knight learned to mask uncertainty behind composure. Over time, this habit shaped his inner life, limiting who he allowed himself to be. Festivals offered brief respite. Music filled great halls. Tables bore roasted meats and spiced wine. Laughter echoed beneath vaulted ceilings. Yet even in celebration, hierarchy remained evident. Seating arrangements signaled rank. Observing etiquette required constant attention. As years advanced, responsibilities multiplied. A knight might oversee training of younger squires, repeating lessons once imposed upon him. Watching them struggle with heavy shields stirred memories of his own early trials. Compassion grew, though discipline remained firm. Letters, when received, carried news of births, marriages, and losses. The written word bridged distance imperfectly. Ink on parchment could not convey tone or touch. Reading such messages in a quiet chamber deepened awareness of absence. Weather shaped daily routine in subtle ways. Autumn brought shorter days and longer shadows across courtyards. Harvest season demanded protection of fields from raids. Winter constrained travel, confining activity within walls. Spring invited renewed campaigns as roads dried and armies mobilized again. Illness within a castle spread rapidly. Close quarters and shared spaces facilitated contagion. A cough in one chamber might soon echo in another. Fear of plague haunted communities across regions. When disease entered a fortress, it disregarded rank. Burial practices varied, yet loss remained constant. Knights attended funerals of comrades, standing beside freshly turned earth. Helmets were removed. Silence marked the moment. The absence of familiar presence lingered long afterward. Through all these experiences, the public image of knighthood endured. Tales recounted bravery and chivalry. Heralds proclaimed achievements. Children watching from village paths saw only mounted figures passing with banners lifted high. The lived reality was layered and demanding. Beneath the polished surface lay fatigue, obligation, and the steady awareness that security was fragile. A knight moved through corridors, fields, and battle lines carrying more than weapons. He bore the invisible weight of expectation, shaped by tradition and reinforced by circumstance. Even in relative calm, the future remained uncertain. Alliances shifted. Borders changed. New threats emerged beyond familiar horizons. Each dawn held possibility and risk in equal measure. And so the cycle continued, not with sudden triumph, but with persistent endurance. Beyond fortresses and open fields, a different burden shaped the life of a mounted warrior, the slow entanglement of law, obligation, and written record. Parchment, though fragile, carried authority equal to steel. Charters defined boundaries. Seals impressed in wax confirmed grants of land or service. A knight who could not read relied on clerks, yet the consequences of misunderstanding were his alone to bear. In many regions, feudal ties formed a web that stretched across valleys and rivers. One oath bound him to a lord, yet that lord might owe allegiance to another. During times of dispute between greater powers, lesser men found themselves divided. Conflicting summons could arrive within the same season. Choosing which call to answer required careful judgment, and any decision risked angering someone of influence. Manorial courts met regularly in timber halls or beneath simple awnings. Peasants gathered to settle quarrels over grazing rights or inheritance of tools and livestock. A knight presided when required, listening to testimony about fences moved or debts unpaid. These sessions were not glorious, yet they shaped the stability of his domain. Fairness preserved trust. Partiality bred resentment. Records of rents and harvest yields demanded attention. Grain measured in bushels determined how many mouths could be fed through winter. A poor season forced difficult choices. Remitting dues might display mercy but weaken finances. Enforcing payment could secure stores yet deepen hardship among tenants. Such decisions rarely satisfied all. Coinage itself varied across territories. Silver pennies minted in one city differed slightly from those struck elsewhere. Debased currency reduced value quietly. Merchants arriving at castle gates sometimes refused certain coins, leading to negotiation and delay. A knight overseeing trade learned quickly that commerce required as much vigilance as warfare. Pilgrimage introduced another dimension. Some warriors traveled to holy sites seeking absolution or renewal. The road to distant shrines wound through towns unfamiliar and landscapes vast. Hostels offered simple lodging. Pilgrims shared meals with strangers from varied backgrounds. Along these routes, stories circulated of miracles and misfortune alike. Encounters with foreign customs broadened awareness. In southern lands, architecture shifted from heavy stone keeps to lighter structures with courtyards open to the sky. In eastern territories, different styles of armor appeared, shaped by alternate traditions of combat. Observing these differences challenged assumptions formed at home. Language barriers complicated alliances. Negotiations required interpreters. Misunderstandings arose easily. Gestures that signaled respect in one region might carry another meaning elsewhere. A knight accustomed to his own customs found himself navigating unfamiliar expectations. Urban centers presented further contrasts. Within city walls, narrow streets bustled with artisans and traders. Guilds regulated crafts with strict rules. Blacksmiths specialized in particular items. Armorers shaped helmets with distinct regional patterns. Exposure to such skill revealed that martial life depended heavily on civilian expertise. Cathedrals rose high above crowded squares. Their stained glass cast colored light across stone floors. Choirs sang during services, filling vast spaces with layered sound. Standing beneath such arches, a knight felt both small and accountable. The contrast between sacred architecture and the brutality of battle lingered in thought. Legal disputes sometimes escalated beyond local resolution. Trial by combat, though less common over time, remained a recognized practice in certain circumstances. Participating in such a proceeding blurred lines between justice and violence. Victory affirmed a claim, yet the outcome rested heavily on physical strength and fortune. Heraldry gained increasing importance. Coats of arms identified lineage and alliances. Colors and symbols carried meaning recognized across borders. Maintaining clarity in these emblems prevented confusion on the battlefield. Alterations required official acknowledgement. A knight guarded his insignia carefully, aware that reputation was intertwined with these signs. Education among the nobility expanded gradually. Some learned to read Latin texts or vernacular chronicles. Exposure to histories of past campaigns offered perspective. Accounts of ancient empires illustrated patterns of rise and decline. Reflection on these narratives could inspire caution or ambition. Seasonal rhythms governed not only agriculture but also military planning. Harvest time limited available manpower for campaigns. Winter curtailed movement across certain terrains. Commanders considered these cycles carefully. A knight preparing for departure often left administrative instructions behind, trusting stewards to manage estates until return. Relations with neighboring lords required diplomacy. Feasts served as opportunities to reinforce alliances. Gift exchange held symbolic weight. A finely crafted dagger or embroidered cloak signaled respect. Such gestures fostered goodwill, yet underlying rivalry sometimes persisted. In border regions, tension simmered continuously. Raids occurred without formal declarations. Small bands crossed boundaries to test defenses or seize livestock. Retaliation followed in kind. These skirmishes seldom entered grand chronicles, yet they shaped daily vigilance. Castles constructed along frontier lines differed in design. Thicker walls and deeper moats reflected heightened risk. Garrison sizes fluctuated according to threat levels. Life in such outposts felt more isolated than in central territories. Supply convoys arrived irregularly. Communication with distant authorities lagged behind events. Weather extremes intensified challenges. In northern climates, prolonged snow blocked roads entirely. Supplies dwindled if stockpiles proved insufficient. In southern plains, drought strained wells and forced livestock to roam farther for pasture. Environmental conditions could undermine even well-prepared defenses. Economic shifts also influenced martial life. As trade expanded, some regions accumulated wealth independent of purely agricultural output. Merchant classes gained influence. Their priorities differed from those of landholding nobility. Negotiating shared interests required patience and adaptability. Technological developments gradually altered warfare. Improvements in crossbow mechanisms increased projectile force. Early forms of gunpowder began to appear in limited contexts, unsettling traditional combat strategies. A knight trained primarily in mounted charge faced a changing landscape. Adapting to innovation demanded humility. Fortifications evolved accordingly. Walls grew thicker to withstand emerging artillery. Towers were reshaped to reduce vulnerability. Architectural adjustments required funding and skilled labor. Investment in such projects diverted resources from other needs. Within households, roles diversified. Women of noble rank often managed estates during prolonged absences. Their oversight ensured continuity. Correspondence between spouses conveyed information about crops, repairs, and political developments. Reliance on such partnership highlighted the interconnected nature of governance. Medical knowledge expanded slowly through contact with scholars in different regions. Translations of classical texts circulated among educated circles. Herbal remedies became more systematic. Surgeons improved techniques for treating wounds. Even so, outcomes remained uncertain, and recovery often depended on resilience as much as skill. Retirement from active campaigning posed its own difficulty. A knight accustomed to constant motion sometimes struggled with quieter routines. Supervising tenants or reviewing accounts felt less urgent than previous endeavors. Physical scars served as reminders of earlier identity. Monastic communities occasionally welcomed aging warriors seeking contemplation. Within cloisters, routine followed a structured schedule of prayer and labor. Silence prevailed in certain hours. Such environments offered contrast to the noise of battlefields. Yet not all could adjust to this rhythm after decades of action. Inheritance practices influenced long-term stability. Primogeniture granted lands to eldest sons, leaving younger siblings to pursue alternative paths, often within the church or through service to other lords. Family bonds intertwined with strategic planning. Marriages cemented alliances across territories. Records preserved in abbey archives chronicled donations and disputes. Names of knights appeared in margins of manuscripts, tied to grants of land or resolution of conflicts. Over generations, these entries accumulated into a quiet testament of involvement in broader currents of history. Traveling minstrels continued to circulate narratives of valor. Their performances in great halls simplified complex realities into clear arcs of triumph. Listeners found comfort in such portrayals. Those who had lived through campaigns recognized the omissions but seldom corrected them publicly. Natural disasters occasionally disrupted established order. Floods altered river courses, erasing boundaries once agreed upon. Fires consumed villages built largely of timber. Recovery required coordination across social ranks. A knight might oversee reconstruction efforts, balancing compassion with fiscal restraint. Pilgrimage routes intersected with trade roads, creating networks that facilitated exchange of ideas. Exposure to new philosophies challenged rigid interpretations of duty. Discussions among educated clergy introduced concepts of just war and moral restraint. These reflections influenced conduct gradually. Festive tournaments evolved into more elaborate spectacles in certain courts. Pageantry increased, incorporating theatrical elements and symbolic rituals. Participation demanded not only martial ability but also performance. Maintaining composure before large audiences added another layer of strain. Throughout these varied experiences, the sense of being constantly observed persisted. Reputation traveled ahead through rumor and report. A misjudged action in one region could shape perceptions elsewhere. Guarding conduct became habitual. Landscape itself imprinted memory. Rolling vineyards in temperate valleys contrasted with dense forests where visibility was limited. Coastal cliffs offered sweeping views of restless seas. Each environment required adaptation in tactics and daily routine. As years passed, the cumulative weight of these responsibilities formed an invisible burden. The armor worn in youth felt heavier not solely because of age but because experience added layers unseen by others. Beneath heraldic colors and polished steel lived a man navigating complexity far removed from simplified legend. And still, each morning arrived with expectations intact, indifferent to fatigue or reflection. As the years moved forward, another strain became evident in ways less visible than scars or weathered armor. It settled into the body gradually, often unnoticed until it refused to be ignored. The physical demands of mounted warfare reshaped a man's frame. Knees bore the memory of long hours pressed against saddle flanks. Fingers stiffened from repeated blows against shield and hilt. Even breathing altered after years of drawing air through narrow visor slits in moments of exertion. Armor itself left lasting marks. The padded garments worn beneath mail absorbed sweat and pressure. Over time, skin hardened in certain places while remaining tender in others. The weight that once signified readiness became an obstacle when lifting it from storage racks. A younger squire might assist in fastening buckles, and the gesture, though practical, carried quiet recognition of passing vigor. Horses aged as well. A mount that had carried its rider through skirmishes and tournaments eventually slowed. Its coat lost some of its sheen. Injuries accumulated in the animal's joints. Replacing such a companion was not a simple matter of purchase. Familiarity between rider and horse developed through years of shared strain. Trust built slowly, and loss of that bond left a hollow space difficult to articulate. Changing military practices further unsettled established habits. Infantry formations grew more disciplined in certain regions. Pikes arranged in tight ranks presented formidable obstacles to cavalry charges. The mounted knight, once central to battlefield dominance, faced tactics that diminished his advantage. Adjusting required humility and new training, sometimes alongside those he had previously commanded from a distance. Urban militias strengthened in wealthier towns. Citizens trained regularly, equipped with standardized weapons funded by communal treasuries. Their cohesion in defense of city walls demonstrated that martial skill was not confined solely to the noble class. Observing this shift challenged assumptions long held about hierarchy and exclusive expertise. Economic transformations altered expectations of landholding as well. Coin-based transactions increased in frequency. Some lords commuted traditional service obligations into monetary payments, allowing them to hire professional soldiers. This transition reshaped relationships rooted in personal loyalty. A knight accustomed to hereditary ties confronted the reality of service purchased by contract. Legal reforms emerged gradually. Written codes replaced certain customary practices. Royal courts asserted authority over disputes once settled locally. Appeals could travel beyond a manor to a distant capital. Navigating these evolving structures required knowledge not previously demanded. Consultation with trained jurists became more common. Castles, once primarily defensive, adapted to changing times. Some expanded to include more comfortable residential spaces. Large windows replaced narrow arrow slits in certain wings. Decorative stonework reflected increased emphasis on display rather than pure fortification. A knight residing in such a place inhabited both a symbol of strength and a stage for political theater. Within these halls, education for children of noble families broadened. Tutors introduced arithmetic, languages, and elements of philosophy. Young heirs studied accounts alongside writing and swordsmanship. This integration of intellectual pursuits with martial training signaled subtle shifts in priorities. Travel to royal courts exposed provincial warriors to refined customs. Etiquette grew more intricate. Clothing styles changed with seasons and fashion. Participation in courtly life required attention to nuance. Failure to observe protocol could result in diminished standing. The skill set necessary for advancement expanded beyond physical prowess. Religious movements also influenced perspective. Reform-minded clergy emphasized introspection and charitable works. Knights were encouraged to support hospitals and almshouses. Donations to monasteries reinforced spiritual aspirations while enhancing family reputation. Acts of generosity, though sincere in many cases, carried political resonance. Encounters with heretical groups introduced tension. In some territories, suspicion fell upon communities diverging from established doctrine. Enforcement of orthodoxy sometimes demanded involvement from armed nobility. The task of suppressing dissent weighed differently from conventional warfare. It involved neighbors rather than distant adversaries. The crusading ideal, which had inspired previous generations, persisted in rhetoric yet grew complicated in practice. Participation required substantial resources and long absences. Stories returned from distant campaigns describing unfamiliar climates and cultures. Not all who departed returned, and those who did often carried impressions that unsettled earlier certainties. Maritime republics expanded influence across trade routes. Their fleets dominated certain seas. Alliances with such powers brought access to goods from far regions, spices, textiles, and metals unknown in earlier centuries. Exposure to these commodities altered tastes and expectations within noble households. Art and literature flourished in select courts. Illuminated manuscripts depicted scenes of romance and devotion. Poets composed verses celebrating refined love and virtuous conduct. A knight immersed in these cultural expressions might measure himself against ideals portrayed in delicate script and pigment. Yet beneath these developments lay persistent vulnerability. Crop failures still occurred. Epidemics still swept through communities with little warning. Even the most elaborately fortified residents offered no shield against invisible contagion. During outbreaks, travel halted. Markets closed. Fear circulated more rapidly than any army. Burial grounds expanded on the edges of towns. Priests moved steadily from house to house administering rites. A knight witnessing such scenes understood that martial skill provided no protection against certain forces. Mortality felt less abstract. As political structures consolidated in some regions, centralized monarchies asserted greater control. Standing armies funded by taxation reduced reliance on feudal levies. Knights found themselves integrated into broader military hierarchies. Promotion depended increasingly on favor and demonstrated competence within organized units rather than solely on lineage. Training reflected these changes. Drill formations emphasized coordination across larger numbers. Standardized equipment facilitated uniformity. Individual valor, while still admired, operated within collective strategy. Adapting to this environment required discipline of a different kind. Meanwhile, rural landscapes evolved. Deforestation to support expanding populations altered terrain. New villages emerged where forests once stood. Agricultural techniques improved in certain areas, increasing yields. Greater prosperity brought both stability and new tensions over land distribution. Road networks improved incrementally. Bridges constructed of stone replaced older wooden crossings. Travel times shortened in some corridors, enhancing communication. A knight riding along such routes encountered a world gradually knitting itself together through trade and administration. The relationship between nobility and peasantry shifted subtly. In regions where labor shortages followed disease outbreaks, surviving workers negotiated better terms. Obligations once rigid softened under economic pressure. Adjusting to these dynamics demanded negotiation rather than command alone. Craft guilds exerted influence within towns, lobbying for privileges and protections. Their collective strength sometimes rivaled that of local lords. Cooperation ensured prosperity, confrontation risked unrest. A knight responsible for regional stability learned to balance authority with pragmatism. Architectural styles reflected cultural exchange. Elements borrowed from distant lands appeared in domestic structures. Decorative motifs crossed borders through artisans traveling for work. The visual landscape of Europe became a tapestry of blended influences. Music, too, diversified. Instruments from other regions entered noble courts. Melodies carried unfamiliar scales. Participation in such performances offered moments of respite from rigid duty. Yet even leisure required attention to decorum. In personal reflection, a seasoned warrior might recognize how far circumstances had shifted since youth. The certainties of early training gave way to complexity. Armor remained tangible, but the environment surrounding its use transformed steadily. Time pressed forward without pause. Younger men, educated in both letters and arms, entered service with perspectives shaped by these evolving conditions. Their confidence reflected adaptation to a changing order. Observing them, an older knight sensed the gradual fading of a world once considered permanent. Still, responsibilities persisted. Fields required oversight. Disputes demanded arbitration. Military readiness could not be abandoned entirely. The burden adapted but did not disappear. In quiet chambers lined with tapestries depicting hunts and battles, a knight sometimes contemplated the arc of his life within broader history. The image of knighthood endured in art and ceremony, yet its lived reality continued to involve compromise, endurance, and adjustment to forces beyond individual control. And so the pattern extended into yet another season, shaped by transformation rather than resolution. Beyond the stone walls and cultivated fields, another horizon gradually pressed against the familiar boundaries of Europe. News traveled along merchant caravans and through port cities of lands farther east, where empires rose and receded with tides of ambition. Maps began to expand in monasteries and royal chancelleries, their margins stretching into territories once filled only with myth. In certain courts, interest in navigation deepened. Mariners studied stars with increasing precision, noting patterns that guided vessels across open water rather than hugging coastlines. Instruments refined in distant regions made their way into workshops near Mediterranean harbors. The astrolabe, carried by scholars from lands shaped by Islamic learning, allowed sailors to calculate latitude with growing confidence. Knowledge passed quietly between cultures, altering the scale of possibility. Shipbuilding evolved accordingly. Hulls strengthened to withstand longer voyages. Lateen sails, angled to harness shifting winds, improved maneuverability. Ports that had once served primarily regional trade began outfitting expeditions toward uncharted shores. For a knight raised in inland strongholds, these developments might have seemed remote, yet their consequences would eventually ripple across even the quietest valleys. Textiles and spices arriving from Asia carried scents and textures unfamiliar to earlier generations. Pepper, cinnamon, and silk signaled connections beyond continental boundaries. The demand for such goods encouraged exploration and negotiation, weaving economic incentives into the fabric of political decision-making. Scholastic institutions flourished during this period as well. Universities in cities such as Paris and Bologna attracted students eager to engage in theology, law, and natural philosophy. Within lecture halls, debates unfolded over the reconciliation of classical texts with Christian doctrine. Translations of Aristotle, preserved and commented upon by scholars in Islamic Spain and the broader Mediterranean world, reshaped intellectual life. Manuscript production expanded through scriptoria and, later, through the emerging craft of movable type printing. The eventual introduction of the press in the mid-15th century multiplied the availability of texts at a pace previously unimaginable. Ideas circulated more swiftly, challenging established hierarchies of knowledge. A knight observing these currents might sense that literacy itself was becoming a form of power. Artistic expression underwent transformation. Painters experimented with perspective, rendering landscapes with newfound depth. Sculptors pursued anatomical realism inspired by classical precedents. In regions such as Florence, patronage from wealthy families fostered cultural renewal. Though distant from many rural estates, the spirit of this Renaissance subtly influenced aesthetics across Europe. Architecture mirrored these shifts. Gothic cathedrals, with their pointed arches and soaring vaults, dominated skylines. Stained glass filtered sunlight into vibrant mosaics of color. These structures demanded collaboration among masons, engineers, and artists, reflecting communal investment in spiritual grandeur. Within such spaces, individuals felt simultaneously humbled and elevated. Meanwhile, legal thought continued to mature. The codification of Roman law informed administrative systems. Contracts, charters, and treaties became more detailed. Governance relied increasingly on documentation rather than solely on oral agreement. For landholding nobility, careful record-keeping ensured legitimacy amid evolving standards. In the countryside, technological innovations altered agricultural rhythms. The adoption of improved plow designs allowed cultivation of heavier soils. Watermills multiplied along rivers, grinding grain more efficiently and powering small industries. Windmills appeared across open plains, transforming steady breezes into mechanical energy. Social mobility, though limited, became more visible in towns. Successful merchants accumulated wealth rivaling that of minor nobles. Some acquired titles through royal favor or marriage alliances. The distinction between birthright and earned prosperity blurred at the edges. Diplomatic relations extended beyond traditional rivalries. Envoys traveled between kingdoms, exchanging gifts and negotiating alliances. Protocol grew more sophisticated. Heraldry expanded to reflect intricate webs of kinship and allegiance. Coats of arms adorned documents, banners, and personal seals. The threat of new military technologies loomed as well. Gunpowder, introduced from East Asia through intermediary routes, began to reshape warfare. Early cannons, cumbersome yet formidable, appeared in sieges. Fortification design adapted to withstand explosive force. Thickened walls and angled bastions replaced earlier vertical defenses. For knights accustomed to close combat, the rise of firearms signaled profound change. Skill with sword and lance no longer guaranteed dominance on the battlefield. Strategy incorporated artillery positioning and coordinated volleys. Training evolved accordingly. Exploration of the Atlantic intensified toward the close of the 15th century. Voyages sponsored by Iberian crowns ventured along African coasts and eventually across the ocean. The journey of Christopher Columbus under the banner of Isabella I of Castile and Ferdinand II of Aragon opened contact with lands previously unknown to Europeans. News of these encounters stirred curiosity and ambition across courts. Reports described unfamiliar peoples, plants, and animals. Cartographers revised their representations of the world, erasing speculative monsters from margins and replacing them with coastlines traced by observation. The conception of global geography expanded dramatically within a single generation. Such discoveries carried complex consequences. Wealth extracted from overseas territories enriched certain monarchies while intensifying competition among powers. Trade networks grew more intricate. Commodities such as sugar and tobacco altered consumption patterns. The flow of silver from the Americas influenced European economies. Religious authority faced upheaval during the 16th century. Critiques of ecclesiastical practice culminated in reform movements. The actions of Martin Luther in Wittenberg initiated theological debates that reverberated across the continent. Printed pamphlets disseminated arguments widely, challenging centralized spiritual control. Conflicts rooted in doctrinal division erupted in several regions. Alliances shifted along confessional lines. For members of the warrior class, allegiance to faith intertwined with loyalty to sovereign. Participation in such struggles carried both spiritual and political implications. Scientific inquiry gradually gained momentum. Observations of celestial bodies led thinkers to question geocentric models. The work of Nicholas Copernicus proposed a heliocentric arrangement that unsettled established cosmology. Though acceptance unfolded slowly, the idea exemplified a broader willingness to reconsider inherited frameworks. Explorers continued to traverse oceans. The circumnavigation accomplished by Ferdinand Magellan and his crew demonstrated the vastness of the globe and the interconnectedness of its waters. Maritime empires expanded accordingly, establishing outposts that facilitated trade and conquest. Urban centers swelled as populations migrated from rural districts seeking opportunity. Infrastructure struggled to accommodate growth. Sanitation challenges persisted. Yet cities became hubs of innovation and cultural exchange. Printing houses, workshops, and marketplaces thrived within their walls. The role of chivalry transformed under these pressures. Tournaments persisted as ceremonial displays rather than preparation for warfare. Codes of honor adapted to fit courtly life rather than battlefield necessity. Manuals outlining etiquette circulated among aspiring gentlemen. Education broadened further during the Renaissance. Humanist scholars emphasized study of classical languages and literature. Latin remained essential for intellectual discourse, yet vernacular languages gained prominence in written works. National identity strengthened through shared texts and histories. Artistic patronage extended beyond religious themes. Portraiture captured individual likeness with remarkable fidelity. Patrons sought representation that conveyed status and personality. The gaze of a painted noble preserved features for future generations, embedding personal narrative within visual culture. In the realm of governance, bureaucratic structures solidified. Taxation systems became more systematic. Standing navies and armies required sustained funding. Administrative offices multiplied, staffed by trained officials rather than solely by hereditary elites. Rural estates, once centers of feudal authority, integrated into national frameworks. Obligations and privileges were increasingly defined by statute. While local customs persisted, they operated within expanding state oversight. Philosophical currents encouraged reflection on governance and society. Thinkers examined the nature of power, virtue, and civic responsibility. Works circulated discussing republican ideals alongside monarchical authority. Debate flourished in salons and universities. As centuries progressed, the medieval knight receded into memory even while remnants of his tradition lingered. The armor once central to identity became ceremonial attire displayed in halls or worn during state occasions. Its weight symbolized heritage more than practical necessity. The transformation of warfare accelerated in subsequent decades. Professional soldiers trained in coordinated musket formations dominated battlefields. Cavalry retained roles but within new tactical frameworks. Artillery determined outcomes in sieges and open engagements alike. Colonial expansion reshaped global interactions. European powers established settlements across continents, entangling distant societies in networks of commerce and domination. Cultural exchange occurred alongside exploitation and conflict. The world became increasingly interconnected, though not without profound cost. Intellectual revolutions unfolded in the 17th century. Advances in mathematics and physics provided tools for understanding motion and gravity. The work of Isaac Newton synthesized earlier discoveries into comprehensive principles. Such achievements signaled a shift toward empirical inquiry as foundation for knowledge. Political upheavals accompanied these developments. Revolutions challenged absolutist regimes. Concepts of rights and representation gained traction. Written constitutions articulated frameworks for governance grounded in popular sovereignty rather than divine mandate. Across this evolving landscape, the legacy of earlier centuries persisted in architecture, literature, and collective memory. Castles stood as monuments to an era defined by mounted warriors and feudal bonds. Cathedrals continued to anchor urban skylines. Manuscripts preserved chronicles of campaigns and lineages. Yet the world had irrevocably changed. Trade routes spanned oceans. Scientific thought questioned ancient assumptions. Religious plurality reshaped communities. Social hierarchies adjusted to new economic realities. In the quiet corridors of ancestral estates, one might sense layers of time coexisting. Suits of mail hung beside printed books. Heraldic banners shared space with maps charting distant continents. The continuity of heritage intertwined with innovation. The journey from insular strongholds to a globally connected society unfolded gradually, shaped by countless decisions and discoveries. Each generation inherited both tradition and transformation. The calm endurance that once defined knighthood found new expression in adaptability and reflection. And so the narrative extended beyond the confines of medieval walls into an era of exploration, inquiry, and redefinition. The rhythms of history continued, steady yet ever-changing, carrying forward the echoes of armor and the promise of horizons yet unseen. Across the 18th century, refinement and unrest advanced side by side. Courtly ritual reached an almost theatrical polish in residences such as Palace of Versailles, where etiquette structured each movement from morning lever to evening reception. Silk garments shimmered beneath chandeliers, and corridors echoed with measured footsteps across parquet floors. Nobility navigated influence through proximity to sovereign authority, while beneath that brilliance, fiscal strain tightened around entire kingdoms. Agricultural improvement continued in certain regions. Crop rotation systems expanded yields, and selective breeding strengthened livestock. Enclosures transformed common lands into privately managed fields, altering village economies. Some rural families prospered under efficient stewardship, others found themselves displaced, seeking livelihood in growing towns. Commercial exchange intensified through chartered companies operating across oceans. The triangular trade connected Europe, Africa, and the Americas in circuits of goods and human suffering. Sugar plantations generated immense profits while entrenching brutal systems of forced labor. Wealth accumulated in port cities, financing grand houses and philanthropic foundations alike, though the moral contradictions remained stark. Intellectual movements flourished in salons and coffee houses. Philosophers debated reason, governance, and individual rights. The writings of Voltaire and Jean-Jacques Rousseau circulated widely, questioning inherited authority. Printed essays encouraged critical examination of monarchy and church alike. Scientific academies promoted experimentation. Observatories tracked planetary motion with increasing precision. Botanical expeditions catalogued species from distant climates, enriching European gardens with unfamiliar flora. Knowledge became both a pursuit of curiosity and a tool of imperial ambition. Political tension mounted in various realms. In North America, colonial resistance to taxation without representation culminated in armed conflict. The emergence of the United States introduced a republic grounded in written constitutional principles. Observers across Europe considered the implications for their own societies. Soon after, revolutionary fervor erupted in France. The storming of the Bastille symbolized a rupture with ancien regime structures. Aristocratic privilege confronted unprecedented challenge. Estates that had stood secure for generations faced confiscation or destruction. The very concept of hereditary authority came under scrutiny. Violence accompanied transformation. Political factions vied for dominance, and public executions became grim spectacles in city squares. Yet from turmoil emerged new frameworks of citizenship and legal equality, imperfect and contested though they were. Napoleonic campaigns extended revolutionary ideals alongside imperial ambition. Armies marched across Europe, redrawing borders and reshaping alliances. The career of Napoleon Bonaparte demonstrated both the possibilities and perils of centralized power. Administrative reforms introduced standardized legal codes in territories under his control, leaving enduring institutional legacies. After his defeat, diplomatic congresses sought to restore balance. The Congress of Vienna convened representatives determined to prevent further continent-wide upheaval. Boundaries were adjusted with careful negotiation, though nationalist aspirations simmered beneath the surface. Industrialization advanced rapidly during the 19th century. Steam engines powered factories and locomotives, compressing distance and time. Coal smoke darkened urban skies. Textile mills operated continuously, drawing laborers into regimented schedules. Mechanization increased productivity while introducing new social strains. Railways stitched regions together with iron tracks. Journeys that once required days by carriage shortened to hours. Markets integrated across broader territories. Migration accelerated, transforming demographic patterns. Industrial cities swelled with opportunity and hardship intertwined. Political reform movements gathered momentum. In Britain, gradual expansion of suffrage broadened electoral participation. On the continent, revolutions in 1848 expressed demands for constitutional governance and national unity. Though many uprisings faltered, the impulse toward representative institutions persisted. Medical knowledge progressed as well. Advances in sanitation reduced mortality in certain areas. Vaccination campaigns curtailed devastating diseases. Hospitals improved surgical techniques through antiseptic practices pioneered by innovators. Life expectancy began to rise gradually in urban populations. Artistic expression responded to these transformations. Romanticism emphasized emotion and individual experience, while later movements explored realism and impressionism. Painters captured industrial landscapes alongside pastoral scenes. Writers chronicled social inequities and moral dilemmas born of rapid change. Colonial expansion intensified during this period. European powers partitioned territories across Africa and Asia, often with scant regard for indigenous societies. Administrative systems imposed foreign rule, extracting resources to fuel metropolitan industries. Cultural exchange occurred amid profound disruption and resistance. Technological inventions reshaped communication. The telegraph transmitted messages across continents in moments. Newspapers reported events with unprecedented immediacy. Public opinion gained influence as information circulated widely. Military organization adapted to industrial capacity. Rifled firearms increased range and accuracy. Ironclad ships replaced wooden fleets. Warfare became more destructive, foreshadowing conflicts of even greater scale. The unification of Germany under Otto von Bismarck altered the balance of power in Europe. National consolidation reshaped diplomatic calculations. Italy likewise achieved unification after decades of struggle, forming a new state from fragmented principalities. Urban planning responded to overcrowding and disease. Wide boulevards replaced narrow medieval streets in cities like Paris, facilitating movement and military control. Public parks offered respite amid dense construction. Infrastructure improvements included sewage systems and gas lighting. Education expanded through compulsory schooling laws. Literacy rates climbed, empowering broader participation in civic life. Universities diversified curricula to include engineering and applied sciences alongside classical studies. Philosophical thought evolved further. Karl Marx analyzed industrial capitalism and its class tensions, proposing radical restructuring of society. Socialist movements organized workers seeking fair wages and conditions. Debates over economic systems shaped political discourse for generations. Toward the century's end, imperial rivalry sharpened. Alliances formed in complex patterns, linking nations in mutual defense arrangements. National pride intensified through public ceremonies and commemorations of past victories. The 20th century dawned with both optimism and latent volatility. Advances in electricity illuminated homes and factories. Automobiles appeared on city streets. Aviation experiments hinted at new dimensions of travel. Yet beneath progress lay mounting tension. The assassination of Archduke Franz Ferdinand in 1914 triggered a chain reaction of mobilizations. The conflict that followed engulfed multiple continents. Trench warfare scarred landscapes. Industrial capacity turned toward unprecedented destruction. After years of devastation, armistice brought fragile peace. Political maps were redrawn once more. Empires dissolved, giving rise to new nation-states. Economic instability and unresolved grievances, however, lingered. The interwar period witnessed cultural experimentation alongside hardship. Jazz rhythms crossed oceans. Modernist art challenged conventions. Meanwhile, authoritarian regimes emerged in several countries, exploiting economic anxiety and nationalist sentiment. Global conflict erupted again in 1939. Mechanized armies and aerial bombardment reshaped combat. The devastation extended beyond battlefields into civilian populations. Cities burned, entire communities were uprooted. Technological innovation accelerated even amid catastrophe. When peace returned in 1945, the geopolitical order shifted dramatically. Two superpowers confronted one another in ideological rivalry. Nuclear weapons introduced existential risk. International institutions formed to promote cooperation and prevent future global wars. Decolonization transformed Asia and Africa during the mid-20th century. Former colonies achieved independence, though challenges of governance and development persisted. Cultural identities asserted themselves in new national frameworks. Economic recovery in Western Europe led to integration efforts. Agreements evolved into structures that facilitated trade and political coordination. Borders softened in some regions, encouraging movement and exchange. Civil rights movements advanced principles of equality across various societies. Legal reforms dismantled discriminatory structures, though social change progressed unevenly. Voices long marginalized gained greater visibility. Technological breakthroughs continued reshaping daily life. Space exploration culminated in human footsteps upon the moon. Digital computation emerged, gradually connecting individuals across vast distances. Communication networks evolved from telegraph wires to global satellites. Cultural production diversified through film, television, and recorded music. Narratives reached audiences worldwide. Collective memory absorbed both triumph and tragedy, forming a complex tapestry of shared experience. By the century's close, globalization accelerated. Markets intertwined. Migration patterns intensified. Environmental concerns entered public consciousness as industrial impact became undeniable. Throughout these transformations, echoes of earlier eras persisted in architecture, ceremony, and language. Medieval fortifications stood beside skyscrapers. Ancient rituals survived in modern institutions. The continuum of history revealed itself not as a sequence of isolated epochs but as an interwoven progression. The armor once emblematic of chivalric identity had long since yielded to uniforms of different design. Yet the underlying human impulses, ambition, resilience, curiosity, fear, remained constant across centuries. Landscapes changed, technologies advanced, ideologies rose and fell, but the essential rhythm of striving endured. Thus the chronicle extended from stone keeps and candlelit manuscripts into an age illuminated by electric light and digital screens. Each generation confronted its own horizon, inheriting both burden and possibility from those who came before. At the threshold of the 21st century, the tempo of change accelerated beyond anything previously recorded. Information traveled instantly through fiber optic cables laid beneath oceans that once carried only wooden hulls and ironclads. Satellites orbited silently above continents, relaying signals that connected villages, capitals, and remote research stations in a continuous web of communication. The landscape of human interaction shifted from parchment and print to illuminated screens. Cities expanded vertically as well as outward. Glass towers reflected clouds where battlements once framed horizons. Financial districts pulsed with transactions measured in milliseconds. Algorithms replaced handwritten ledgers, calculating risk and opportunity at scales unimaginable to earlier merchants. Markets responded to events unfolding thousands of kilometers away, compressing geography into data streams. Meanwhile, rural regions adapted in distinct ways. Mechanized agriculture utilized GPS-guided equipment to cultivate fields with precision. Drones surveyed crops from above, identifying patterns invisible at ground level. Genetic research improved resilience against drought and disease, altering the relationship between climate and harvest. Ancient cycles of sowing and reaping persisted, yet technology now intervened at nearly every stage. Globalization intensified cultural exchange. Music, film, and literature crossed borders without physical shipment. Languages mingled in digital forums. Culinary traditions blended ingredients from multiple continents. Migration reshaped demographics, creating urban mosaics of heritage and belief. Identity became layered rather than singular. Political structures encountered new pressures. Supranational organizations mediated trade disputes and environmental agreements. Regional unions facilitated cooperation across former rivalries. Yet nationalist movements also resurfaced, asserting sovereignty against perceived external influence. Electoral debates increasingly unfolded online, where narratives spread rapidly and sometimes without verification. The early decades of the century were marked by conflict as well. Military engagement shifted toward asymmetric strategies. Cyber operations targeted infrastructure and information systems. Battlefields extended into virtual domains where code could disrupt economies or communications. Traditional concepts of defense expanded to include digital resilience. Terrorism altered security frameworks in numerous countries. Airports, public spaces, and international events adopted heightened protective measures. Surveillance technologies proliferated, balancing safety with concerns over privacy. Legal systems grappled with questions of civil liberty in an era of global threat networks. Environmental awareness deepened as scientific consensus emphasized climate change. Melting glaciers, rising sea levels, and intensified storms signaled systemic transformation. International accords sought to reduce emissions, though implementation varied. Renewable energy sources, solar, wind, and hydroelectric, gained prominence, gradually reshaping power grids. Urban planners incorporated sustainability into design. Green roofs moderated temperature and absorbed rainfall. Public transportation networks aimed to reduce congestion and pollution. Smart city initiatives integrated sensors to optimize traffic flow and energy consumption. Architecture reflects healthcare advanced through biotechnology and data analytics. Genome sequencing enabled personalized medicine tailored to individual genetic profiles. Vaccination campaigns expanded to address emerging diseases. Telemedicine connected patients in remote regions to specialists across continents. Yet disparities in access persisted, highlighting ongoing inequities. Education transformed through digital platforms. Online courses reached students far from traditional institutions. Virtual classrooms facilitated international collaboration. Artificial intelligence assisted in adaptive learning, adjusting content to individual progress. Libraries digitized vast archives, making rare manuscripts accessible worldwide. Economic systems encountered volatility during financial crises that rippled across interconnected markets. Governments implemented stimulus measures and regulatory reforms to stabilize economies. Central banks coordinated policies in response to global downturns. Recovery efforts underscored the interdependence of nations. Cultural memory adapted to new mediums. Social networks preserved personal histories through photographs and commentary. Memorials to past conflicts coexisted with digital commemorations accessible from any device. The preservation of heritage relied increasingly on both physical conservation and virtual documentation. Scientific exploration extended beyond Earth's orbit once more. Robotic missions surveyed Mars and distant asteroids. Private enterprises entered the realm of space travel, collaborating with agencies such as NASA. The possibility of sustained extraterrestrial presence shifted from speculative fiction to engineering challenge. Artificial intelligence matured into practical application across industries. Machine learning algorithms analyzed medical images, predicted weather patterns, and translated languages in real time. Ethical considerations accompanied these capabilities. Scholars and policymakers debated accountability, bias, and autonomy in systems capable of independent decision-making. The arts responded dynamically to digital tools. Visual creators employed virtual reality to construct immersive environments. Musicians composed using software that blended acoustic and electronic elements seamlessly. Writers experimented with interactive narratives shaped by reader choice. Creative expression transcended traditional formats. Pandemic conditions during the early 2020s altered daily life globally. Lockdowns restricted movement, remote work became commonplace. Public health infrastructure faced unprecedented strain. Scientific collaboration accelerated vaccine development in record time, demonstrating both vulnerability and resilience within interconnected societies. Supply chains revealed fragility under disruption. Industries reconsidered production models dependent on distant manufacturing. Conversations about local sourcing and strategic reserves gained prominence. Economic adaptation unfolded amid uncertainty. Social movements harnessed digital organization to advocate for justice and reform. Demonstrations coordinated through online platforms mobilized participants rapidly. Public discourse intensified around equality, representation, and historical accountability. Institutions reevaluated traditions in light of contemporary values. Climate-related events, wildfires, floods, heatwaves, underscored environmental urgency. Youth activism brought renewed energy to sustainability initiatives. Investment in green technologies expanded, though debates continued over pace and responsibility. Technological frontiers broadened further with advances in quantum computing and biotechnology. Laboratories pursued breakthroughs that could revolutionize encryption, materials science, and disease treatment. Ethical frameworks struggled to keep pace with innovation. Geopolitical dynamics evolved as emerging economies asserted influence. Trade corridors shifted, infrastructure projects linked continents through rail and maritime routes. Strategic competition extended into domains such as semiconductor manufacturing and rare earth resources. Cultural preservation faced challenges amid rapid modernization. Indigenous languages risked extinction even as global communication flourished. Efforts to document and revitalize traditions gained urgency. Museums and archives collaborated with communities to safeguard heritage. Demographic shifts altered social structures. Aging populations in certain regions required expanded healthcare and pension systems. Youthful demographics elsewhere fueled labor markets and cultural vitality. Migration patterns responded to economic opportunity and environmental stress. Digital currencies and blockchain technologies introduced alternative financial architectures. Governments explored central bank digital currencies while private entities launched decentralized platforms. Regulation sought balance between innovation and stability. Transportation innovation continued with electric vehicles and autonomous driving systems. Urban air mobility concepts proposed small aircraft for metropolitan transit. Infrastructure adaptation accompanied these developments, integrating charging networks and data communication systems. Psychological landscapes evolved alongside technological immersion. Constant connectivity influenced attention, relationships, and self-perception. Researchers examined impacts of social media on mental health, emphasizing mindful engagement. As decades progressed, the boundaries between physical and virtual environments blurred. Augmented reality overlaid digital information onto streets and landscapes. Remote collaboration simulated presence across continents. Workplaces, classrooms, and cultural venues integrated hybrid experiences. Amid such transformation, continuity persisted in quieter forms. Families gathered for meals. Seasonal festivals marked passage of time. Communities maintained rituals that predated electricity and engines. Human connection endured a central axis around which innovation revolved. Archaeologists continued excavating sites from ancient civilizations, uncovering artifacts that illuminated distant epochs. Advanced imaging techniques revealed hidden layers within ruins without disturbing them. Each discovery reinforced awareness of deep historical roots beneath contemporary structures. Environmental restoration projects sought to rehabilitate ecosystems damaged by industrial expansion. Reforestation initiatives and wildlife conservation efforts aimed to rebalance biodiversity. International cooperation addressed shared resources such as oceans and polar regions. Education emphasized interdisciplinary study, recognizing that complex challenges required integration of science, humanities, and policy. Students prepared for careers not yet defined, navigating uncertainty with adaptability. Public discourse reflected diverse perspectives amplified by global communication. Dialogue sometimes fractured into polarized communities, yet collaborative initiatives also flourished across cultural divides. Digital platforms became arenas for both division and solidarity. In laboratories and think tanks, discussions about artificial general intelligence and ethical governance gained prominence. Philosophers revisited questions about consciousness and agency in light of machine learning advancements. Legal scholars considered frameworks for accountability in automated systems. The exploration of renewable resources extended offshore, with wind farms rising from coastal waters. Desalination technologies addressed water scarcity in arid regions. Agricultural research explored vertical farming within urban centers, reducing transportation distance between cultivation and consumption. Crisis response mechanisms improved through predictive modeling and coordinated logistics. Disaster relief operations utilized satellite imagery and real-time mapping to deliver aid efficiently. International cooperation often transcended political tension in moments of humanitarian need. The cumulative narrative of human endeavor now spanned from mounted warriors to digital architects. Each epoch contributed distinct innovations and dilemmas. The quiet resilience that once characterized individuals within stone fortresses found new expression in adaptability to rapid transformation. History did not conclude, it unfolded continuously, shaped by collective choice and unforeseen discovery. The cadence of progress remained steady yet unpredictable. Beneath satellites and skyscrapers lay the same enduring impulses that once guided travelers along unpaved roads: curiosity about what lay beyond the visible horizon and determination to endure whatever emerged from it.